to come and to introduce John Carpay, who's just flown in from Calgary.
How's that going to do you now?
Maybe up a little higher.
A little higher. Okay, here we go. How we doing?
I think that's good. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning.
Have to move to that.
My thanks to Reed Ellie and to Freedom Defence Canada for the very kind invitation to be with you this morning. Just really delighted to be here. Now, we are really, when you look at Canada today compared to other countries in the world or compared to other eras in history, we're actually doing spectacularly well in so many ways. We have unprecedented prosperity that people 100 years ago could not have dreamed of, or that people in some parts of the world today would only dream of. And we have unprecedented freedom, more so than so many places where you can get shot while trying to go to the polling station to vote, or you can be imprisoned or killed because of your faith. And so we have unprecedented freedom. That's all well and good, but people have forgotten, or with some of the younger generation, have never learned the foundations of freedom. In our free society, it's like a house or a building. It has foundations. If a house has no foundations, if it doesn't have the cement foundation and the strong pillars, it can't support the roof and the different floors and so on. And so what are the foundations of our free society? Well, they include freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, private property rights, economic liberty, the rule of law, parental rights in education, parental rights generally. These are the foundations of our free society. And these are under very vicious and aggressive attack. And it's like the outside of the building is still standing, but we're in deep, deep trouble when these foundations are getting attacked. Okay, so right now the building's still standing, it's still looking good, but if the foundations are destroyed, the whole building is going to collapse. And so we see very aggressive attacks. They've been getting stronger in recent decades. We see Trinity Western University being told by 3 law societies, Law Society of BC, Law Society of Ontario, or Law Society of Upper Canada as it's still called, and the Law Society in Nova Scotia, refuse to accredit Trinity Western's proposed law school, while admitting publicly and admitting in court documents that the law program is academically sound. None of these 3 law societies have questioned, publicly or privately or in court or out of court, none of them question that Trinity Western has a sound, academically sound law program that's going to graduate good, competent, professional lawyers. Not in dispute, not an issue. What's the reason? They can't stand the fact that Trinity Western's got this community covenant, which includes, as you would expect from an evangelical Christian university, it's got certain prohibitions. There's no smoking on campus, there's no drunkenness that's allowed. They have a rule against gossip. And they also have a rule on no sexual activity outside of the marriage of one man and one woman. Pretty standard stuff. And if you don't want to go there, and a lot of young Canadians would not want to go to Trinity Western University because of those prohibitions. And yet, there's this bigotry on the part of the law societies where they just have no appreciation of the free society. They don't seem to understand that a free society allows different views on issues, and one of those issues is sexuality. And Canadians have different opinions about sexuality. And some Canadians would say, kind of a Trinity Western type of approach and say any sex outside of the marriage of one man and one woman is wrong. Other people would say, no, if you want to hook up with somebody that you met 5 minutes ago, as long as it's consensual, that's perfectly fine. And those are maybe two extremes, and everything in between. People have different opinions, but yet the law societies think that their personal opinions about sexuality ought to be imposed on a private organization. This is an attack on freedom of association as well as religious freedom, because these law societies, they don't have a problem with a young man or a young woman who goes to law school as an individual, who is, say, evangelical Christian or practicing Catholic or Orthodox Jewish or practicing Muslim, an individual law student who goes to university and personally practices traditional sexual morality and doesn't sleep around while they're in law school. The law societies don't have a problem with that. They say, well, that's fine, you can apply, you can become a lawyer. The moment these individuals come together into a community and say, well, we're studying law together and we're in a community, voluntary community, nobody has to join it. If you do join our community has certain rules. And then the law society says, oh, no, that's not allowed. So it's an attack on freedom of association. It's saying, well, you can do this individually, but you can't do it as part of a group. That's a no-no. And so that's been the argument that the Justice Centre has put forward in British Columbia, Ontario, and Nova Scotia in the court cases that Trinity Western has launched. But it's scary stuff, especially the lawyers. There's only one time in my life that I have felt ashamed to be a lawyer, and that was when the lawyers in British Columbia voted 2-1 to trample on and repudiate the charter freedoms of Trinity Western University. You know, lawyers are supposed to be the guardians of freedom, and often they are. You know, they take on unpopular cases. You know, if there's some man is accused of some horrible crime, you know, maybe kidnapping and raping and killing a little girl, and the lawyer will get in there and say, well, there's a lot of emotion going on, and you know, this man might be guilty, but we've got rights and freedoms, and this man has a right to a fair trial before an impartial tribunal, and the onus is on the Crown to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the man committed this crime, and I'm going to defend this guy, make sure that his rights are respected. Why? For the sake of everybody's rights. Because if the government can just throw somebody in prison without having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person did it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, without that, everybody's in danger. So sometimes lawyers do a good job of defending the freedoms, but here, the Law Society of British Columbia got it right the first time. They said Trinity Western can have a law school. There's no reason not to, and it's part of the Charter of Freedom. I even remember one of the benchers was a woman in her mid-40s, and she, because the benchers were talking about what their position was, and she said, I'm an atheist, and I think that religion has done more harm than good. I'm not a fan of religion. I'm not a fan of Trinity Western. I'm not a fan of their code of conduct. But I understand that we live in a free society, and if there are people that have those beliefs, if they want to peacefully associate together and practice those beliefs and preach and proclaim those beliefs, they have the right to do that. So I'm voting for the law program at Trinity Western University. And that's somebody who understood the free society. She got it. She gets it, right? That she's not religious, and nor does she have to be. In fact, she said she dislikes religion. She thinks religion has done more harm than good in history. That's her opinion. So they got it right the first time, and then they moved this referendum, and then 2/3 of the lawyers in BC voted against fundamental charter freedoms. So we know our society is in deep trouble when the lawyers who are supposed to be the guardians are repudiating their own role in that regard. Trinity Western took it to court, won BC Supreme Court, and won again BC Court of Appeal, and now it's on its way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Is going to hear it November 30th and the first day of December. Crucially important, because if the law societies can close the legal profession to people because of their opinions about sexuality, there's no reason why they can't enforce that for the profession in its entirety. I mean, there's no logical reason, there's no logical distinction between saying Trinity Western cannot have a law school and the law society of this province cannot have Christian lawyers. It's identical thinking. The only reason they're not trying to turf the lawyers, the Christian lawyers out of the legal profession, and they don't really have the nerve to do it. They don't think that they can win, but they're going after something that they think is winnable. So it's very important for the Free Society that Trinity Western get a favorable ruling from the Supreme Court. I would peg their chances at about 50-50. Because the Supreme Court of Canada does not follow precedent. If they did, this would be a slam dunk. Because the same battle was fought 15 years ago with the BC College of Teachers, denying the teachers program for the same reason. Because they can't stand the fact that there's people in Canada that think that gay sex is sinful. You know, this keeps them awake at night. They can't stand it that there's people that have that belief, and they want to make sure that that gets squashed out and trampled out. So there's an example. There's an attack on freedom of association and freedom of religion. Just about 10 days ago, it hit the media. The public became aware of the fact that the Law Society of Upper Canada, the same one that won't recognize the law program at Trinity Western University, is requiring every lawyer in Ontario to sign a statement, a declaration that they're going to commit to promoting equality, diversity, and inclusion. This was pointed out. Law professor at Queen's University, Bruce Pardy, a friend of mine, I've known him for many years, and he wrote in the National Post today, opening up his mail. You know, if you're a lawyer, you get mail from the Law Society periodically, and he said, "Am I in North Korea? The government's going to compel me to make a statement." And you know, there's a whole bunch of problems with this. I mean, for one, to promote equality, okay, are we talking about equality of opportunity, where everybody has an opportunity to work hard, or be lazy, or make smart choices, or make dumb choices, or people have an opportunity to make decisions, to use their talents, with results that could be all over the map, right? Some people have more talent than others, some people are smarter, some people work harder, you get all kinds of different outcomes. But are we talking about equality of opportunity? That's one concept. Or are we talking about equality of outcome? That's very different. Equality of outcome, that's this idea that if there's a corporation that has a board of directors and there's 10 directors on the board, well then 5 of them must be women, and you know, 1 of them must be Aboriginal, and 1 of them must belong to this ethnic group, and 3 of them to that ethnic group. That's the equality of outcome, right? So you know, if I tell you go out and promote equality, I mean, what does that even mean without defining it? And inclusion, I mean, Law Society of Upper Canada is not very inclusive when it comes to Trinity Western University, and certainly not interested in diversity when it comes to legal education. But there's a bigger problem. Even if you agreed with equality, diversity, and inclusion, even if we all understood together, we were all in agreement as to what those terms meant, and even if we all agreed that they were good things, there's something wrong in a free country where the government forces you to say something, right? Even if it's something you agree with. As Bruce Pardy once pointed out, I think it was before a parliamentary committee on motion M103, this Islamophobia business. And he said, you know, if the government passed a law making it mandatory to say hello and goodbye and please and thank you, the thing that's wrong with that, it's not that hello, goodbye, please and thank you are bad things. It's the fact that like the government's forcing you to say that. That's what's wrong with it. So here you've got the Law Society of Upper Canada, you know, and ignoring Supreme Court of Canada in one of its rulings was very clear on this. Compelled speech is, in the words of the Supreme Court of Canada, totalitarian, and it is alien to the democratic tradition of Canada. And again, here we've got the Law Society, which, and you'd hope they would know better, is coming out with this edict. The rule of law under attack today, massively. The rule of law is the idea that we are governed by laws, not by the whim of the king or a majority opinion or the mob, right? That we're all subject to laws, and that the law applies equally to everybody, including the king. Even the king cannot break the law. Now, that's a short summary of it. Many books have been written about the rule of law, but it is one of the underpinnings of our legal system and one of the underpinnings of our society in Canada. And yet you have universities that condone mob censorship. There's a small campus pro-life group at the University of Alberta, put up a display March of 2015, surrounded by a mob, chanting, screaming, holding up towels and banners, shutting down any discussion that was actually the goal of having the display. And campus security just stands by and watches. They have a written rule at the University of Alberta that you cannot obstruct or interrupt or disrupt university-related activities and events. They didn't even enforce it. Say, oh yeah, we had this mob that's shutting down a pro-life display, that's okay. So that's an abdication that you don't have the rule of law if you're going to let a mob decide what goes on in society. So what do we do about it? Well, I'll touch on it now in the first talk. I believe I'm doing 2 talks, so.
Right.
I mean, the starting point, what do you do about it is stop appeasing, stop appeasement. That's the first. To appease is to cooperate with injustice because you want to avoid conflict. And to appease is also to comply with the request of a bully in the hope that the bully's going to stop if you meet the demands. And it doesn't work, right? If the bully says, give me your lunch, or else, I'm going to break your glasses, I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to do this or do that. If you give in to that and give the bully your lunch, he's not going to go away. He's going to be coming back the following day and saying, and now give me your lunch, I also want you to do my homework for me and turn that in. And if you say yes to that, they'll come back and the demands just get worse. You know, it's a lesson, World War II, tens of millions of people died. That could have been avoided if Chamberlain in Britain and other world leaders had not appeased Hitler and allowed him to get stronger and stronger. And this is a lesson most of us in this room see some gray hairs in the room. We know this. Younger people, I don't know, I don't know about BC, but in Alberta, the history is not really part of the school curriculum, so I don't know how many younger people even know about appeasement or what happened prior to World War II. So, stop the appeasement. Don't cooperate. I'll give you an example of appeasement. Here in BC, about a year and a half ago, the provincial government issued an order requiring every school, including every private independent school in British Columbia, must have an anti-bullying policy in place, and the anti-bullying policy must list all these different grounds, and it must include sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yeah.
Every school in British Columbia is required by this order to do this. And the head of the Federation of Independent Schools Associations went along with this and said, oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, we'll encourage our schools to comply with that and put sexual orientation and gender identity into their school policies. And I had a discussion. I said, no, like that's you're going to get taken to court sooner or later by somebody who's unhappy with you, and you're going to have schools being hauled before courts or before human rights tribunals. And what's the court going to do? Well, whenever an organization gets sued, whether it's a church or a business or a school or whatever, when an organization gets sued, one of the things the court looks at is what are the organization's own policies? And is the organization complying with those? So if you put sexual orientation and gender identity into your own policies, you're slitting your own throat. Because when there's a court case, the court's going to look at it and say, you know, so you're going to get some kid who's going to complain that they feel bullied because, you know, the teacher said that sex outside of marriage is is sinful, or they're going to say they feel bullied because the school didn't, agree with the demand that the boy could, wear a skirt and use the girls' change rooms. And so you're going to get a complaint, and the schools are slitting their own throats by complying with this. And fortunately, there was one school in BC said, no, we're not doing this. It's a Christian school, and they said, well, in the Bible, God's commands apply to everybody all the time, and there isn't a list of grounds. And they quoted to the verse in Scripture that said, in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. And so, in our view, it's against the Bible to enumerate a whole bunch of different grounds and say that bullying is prohibited for, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, this, that, the other thing. We're going beyond anti-bullying. We want to teach our kids love, and we want to try to go after the root causes of bullying, things like sin, hatred, fear. We want to tackle those roots. So we've got a policy that mandates Christian love and kindness, and it prohibits bullying across the board. And we're not going to spell out a list of grounds because that's contrary to our beliefs, to spell out a list of grounds. So far, one school, I hope that there'll be more.
Which school? Do you mind?
Can't. I sure do know which school, but no.
We can't say, okay.
No. I can't say who my clients are unless they give their permission. I don't really have it in this. Okay. But here's the thing: if the government tries to shut down this school, the government's going to be not in a great legal position. They're going to try to go to court, shut down the school because they say, well, the school's bullying policies or the school's anti-bullying policies aren't good enough. The school's going to say, well, look at our policies. They're great. What's wrong with them? The government's going to be hard. They're going to be between a rock and a hard place. And this school is, if some disgruntled kid or pushed by parents or on their own initiative, whatever the case might be, some kid tries to take this school to court or file a human rights complaint, it's going to be hard. At least the school is not going to have its own policies that are going to be used against the school. So this is an example of non-appeasement, because the enemies of freedom, and they are well-intentioned people, never question other people's motives. Right? When people are doing bad things, they're doing it because they sincerely believe that they're doing the right thing. They're trying to do something good. And we can think it's very misguided or beyond misguided. We can think it's pure evil. They're doing it for good motives. So don't question motives of the other side. But you can see the enemies of freedom. They get their way through bullying and intimidation most of the time. It's all psychological warfare. The head of the Federation of Independent Schools Association was told by the Liberal government, well, you'd better comply with this because if you comply with this, it's going to help us to get re-elected because we're getting a lot of pressure to put through this stuff. And so if you comply with this, then we're going to get re-elected, and then you're not going to have the MVP. But if you don't comply with this, then that's going to hurt the Liberals in the election, and then the NDP is going to win, and then you'll be in real trouble. Right? So it's all psychological warfare. And this is how we lose our freedoms bit by bit by bit. It's by people, it's by appeasement and compliance. So I'll close the first talk with a good example of non-appeasement, or another one. So you have one example from this one school in BC that says, no, we're not putting any grounds into our anti-bullying policy. We just prohibit bullying across the board, period, full stop. No grounds listed. Smart. I had the honor of working for students at the University of Calgary. This was some years ago, starting back around 2006, all the way through 2014. Acted for these students for 8 years. And it was Campus Pro-Life Club, University of Calgary, put up a display 2 days in the spring, 2 days in the fall, and big, large posters showing what abortion's all about. And the university was getting some pressure that, oh, this is really offensive, you gotta do something about it. And the university tried different things. They tried trespassing charges, had their own students charged with trespassing. Students, we took that to court, we pled not guilty, and then before trial the Crown withdrew the charges because the university could not point to a single rule or policy or bylaw that the students were in violation of. It got harder though for the students. You know, and getting charged with trespassing that's kind of like getting a speeding ticket. It's not a criminal offense. Worst case scenario, if you get convicted, you got to pay a fine. It's not the end of the world. University upped the stakes, and they said if you continue to put up your display without turning the signs inwards, this was a demand the university came up with, was set up your display in a circle, but with the signs facing inwards so that nobody walking by can see the signs. And your freedom of expression is not being violated at all because you have the full freedom. You can invite anybody you want to come inside the circle and look at your signs. And the students said, quite reasonably, you don't put that demand on any other group on campus that, you know, you have to hide your sign and like, psst, come over here, I'm going to show you the sign, right? Like, no, everybody else, you know, you can hold up your sign, whatever it is. So they said no, and the university threatened them and said, if you continue with this, you will be found guilty of non-academic misconduct, for which the consequences include warning, suspension, probation, or expulsion from the university. And I couldn't tell the students with confidence that if they proceeded to put up their display on campus, that they would not get into trouble. I don't know if they're going to do it or not. So yeah, you might, if you put up that display, there is a chance the university will find you guilty of non-academic misconduct, and you could be expelled from the university. Now, I will act for you as your lawyer to challenge that in court if it happens, but then I can't really promise you that we'll win in court because you don't always win in court. So they did not have a guarantee. And yet, these 20-year-olds, imagine being 20 years old and you got your future ahead of you and you want to have a career as a doctor, as a teacher, as a nurse, whatever. You know, if you get expelled from the university, you can't just reapply somewhere else. Just like that. It's going to be on your transcript, expelled for non-academic misconduct. So these students, they had a risk that they could be expelled from the university and have their entire future jeopardized. And they went back the following morning and they put up their display on campus. That is the kind of courage that is going to save the free society. But it's only that kind of courage. Anything less than that, you know, we're in deep trouble. And I wish, you know, I'd like to think that if I'd been in their shoes, I would have done the same thing. But it's so easy. That's just speculation, right? It's easy to look back on and say, oh yeah, you know, I would have put up the display again. I don't know if I would. I would like to think that I would have done the same thing as them, but you know, I don't know. I didn't. Wasn't my career that was on the line. It was theirs. So what happened? I'll tell you the rest of the story very briefly. So they put up their display again. The university charged them with non-academic misconduct, found them guilty, and imposed the penalty of a warning. But they didn't know that ahead of time, okay? And then they said, well, if you keep on doing this, it's going to escalate from warning to probation, to suspension, to expulsion. It's going to escalate. So on that basis, even though the penalty was nothing more than just a warning, it was the finding of guilt. We sued the university. We took them to court in 2011, and that litigation went on for 3 years. It always goes on for years. Lots of interesting ups and downs and bumps in the road and cross-examinations on affidavits and so on and so forth. But we got a judgment in 2014, and the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench set aside the university's decision to find the students guilty of non-academic misconduct. So that's the difference that it makes. And you know, the students don't get as much credit as they should for it, because, you know, yeah, it's important to have lawyers that are willing to fight these battles, it's even more important to have clients that are willing to display the courage. Because if the clients aren't there, a lawyer can't just go into court and say, I want to take this on, right? The court's going to say you have no standing. You need to bring a client who is personally impacted by the violation of the freedom. That client has to be the litigant in a court case. Lawyers on their own can't go to court seeking these things. You need the client. So those are examples of non-appeasement, of just saying no. You get a demand, turn the signs inwards. No. Okay, we're going to expel you, possibly we're going to discipline you. No, we're not doing it. That is what's going to save our free society. So I'll conclude my first talk there.